Welcome back to Country Cow Designs. I'm Jo, and in this video tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to make this. This is the Avalow Tote. It is our newest sewing pattern. We make sewing patterns for bag makers. And yeah, there's a few options on this bag, so I'm just going to walk you through a little bit about it. As you can see, it's quite a big tote. It's a good size. It's got bottle pockets in it, so we've got bottle pockets for your water and of course your coffee. This bag was kind of designed for coffee because I couldn't fit it in my current bag. And we've also got a zip pocket on the inside, and then, so I'm just going to show you the inside there. And then we have got loads of pockets on the outside. So we've got a big pocket at the bottom here, which I'm just going to show you. This is a standard size iPhone, so you kind of get the idea of the size. And then you've got two little pockets up here. And on the back, this one was actually designed for your phone to go in. So it's got handy little grab handles. You could skip those if you wanted to. You could skip some of the pockets. There's so many changes you could make to this bag to customize it for you. This has a mag snap top, and what else does it have? It has the option for buttons or magnetic snaps for these, so you can see the difference in the two. They are quite different. It gives a completely different finished style. So we had some amazing pattern testers for this bag, and we'll show you some of the photos now, but go onto the website countrycowdesigns.com if you want to grab the pattern, and you can see even more of the tester photos. So as you can see, all of these bags here are made using our Mora faux leather, which I made all of them on my Janome HD9 sewing machine. But for the video tutorial, we're just going to be doing a lightweight canvas one, because I want to show you that you can still make it in domestic friendly materials. Just make sure that whatever machine you're using, that you're customizing the materials and using what your machine can handle. All the hardware, zips and fabrics shown here are available on our website as well if you want to grab any of those. So you can just watch the tutorial with me, or you can grab the pattern from countrycowdesigns.com, download it and get sewing with me. Let me know what you think of the bag in the comments. I hope you love it. Let's get started. Step one of the pattern is preparation. So for this step, just consider what fabrics you're using. So if you're using a domestic sewing machine, I would recommend sticking with lighter fabrics. I'm using cotton canvas, which is quite nice, and a few quilting cottons. The structure is going to be given by the stabilizer, which is foam. So you don't need to worry so much about that. Just make sure that you choose fabrics that your sewing machine can handle. There is instructions in the cutting chart for interfacing all of your fabrics. So you can see mine are interfaced with a medium woven cotton interfacing. I have interfaced all of the parts that are instructed to in the pattern. Make sure that you print out your cutting and interfacing chart. This is going to be the easiest way to prep for your pattern. So there's a video on our YouTube channel about how to print correctly, making sure that your pattern pieces don't scale. We really recommend printing from a computer, not a mobile device. So this chart shows every pattern piece, and it gives its size in imperial and metric. You can check it off once you've cut out your pattern pieces. It has the letter reference for each pattern piece, and there's also labels so you can attach them and you don't forget which pattern piece is which. So this is page 23 of the pattern that you want to print along with your pattern pieces. And each of the starred pieces is where I recommend having a woven interfacing. So before you start, you can go ahead and attach your gusset foam stabilizers to your exterior gusset pieces. And you can also fuse the flap stabilizers in place onto the lining pieces. But do not attach the main panels yet. We're going to sew these in later once we've constructed the exterior panels. So we use Decaville Light as a stabilizer for the flaps to give them longevity, and we use foam for the main stabilizer to give the bag its structure. You also need to decide whether you want to use buttons like this or whether you'd prefer to have magnetic snaps. So just make sure you decided that before you begin. Another option could be to use little toggles like this. So there's loads of options of what you could use on your bag pockets. So for this video tutorial, I am using this cream canvas for the lining. I'm using a black canvas for the exterior main panels. And then I have a variety of quilting cottons for the pockets and things like that. I'm hoping that will make the video really clear, because you'll be able to see everything as it's being assembled and know what you're looking at. I've also got grab handles, zips, piping for inside the handles, that is optional. And then I have my hardware, swivel hooks, D-rings, strap slider, rivets, zip pulls, magnetic snaps for the top closure, and then I have my fold over elastic and stretchy mesh pocket for my bottle pocket. Again, this is optional. You could cut this out if you want. The only pocket that is absolutely essential in this pattern is the interior zip pocket, because we close up the bag through there. So all the other pockets you can mix and match and skip if you want to. Okay, so let's get started. Step 2 is the exterior zip pocket and the grab handles. So for this step you're going to need your 10-inch zip, and I've got a zip pull for that, your grab handles, piping cords, zip pocket facing, one zip pocket piece, and 2 exterior main panels. So I've cut my zip pocket facing out of a matching fabric to the exterior main, just because it's gonna make sure it's got a really neat finish, and because it's black I didn't want to have kind of like a tiny bit of the lining fabric on show. So set everything aside except for the zip pocket, and we're just going to chop this into 2 pieces. So you've got your measurements in the pattern, we're just dividing it into 2. Okay, so let's start with the smaller one. I'm going to grab the zip. So the pocket piece is right side up. Place the zip right side up on that top edge and clip it together. If you're using a nylon zip tape like I am, you might just want to melt the end of the zip tape. It will just stop it from fraying over time. And for mine, I'm going to add the zip pull at the end, as it's easier to sew without the zip pull on there. So I'm just going to sew this top edge here with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. Scant is slightly less than. Now I'm going to take this over to the iron, and I'm going to press the pocket piece away from the zip so that it's lying flat like this. If you have a difficult fabric like a polyester waterproof canvas, you might just want to top stitch through there to make sure that it lays flat. Okay, so set that aside for a moment. Grab your zip pocket facing, and on the wrong side, so this is my interfacing side, you'll want to mark this line, which you can get from the pattern piece here. So that's my zip pocket facing. Now I'm just going to mark the center on this top edge. The easiest way to do this, I find, is with a pair of scissors. So it creates a nice little point there. So I'm going to do the same thing with my lower exterior panel. So this is the one that's going to be on the bottom. So these two, the zip pocket facing and the exterior main panel, are going right sides together. Match up those center marks and clip those together. If you're worried about your center marks, you can just check that it's the equal distance on either side. What we're now going to do is we're going to sew this line here. Make sure you use a smaller stitch length on these curves, it will make it easier, and back stitch at the beginning and end. Okay, so we now just want to trim this seam allowance out here, and if you have a pair of pinking shears, it just helps the curves to lay a little bit flatter, but if you don't, you can just use a small pair of scissors and cut little triangles into the curves. So it would be the same effect as the pinking shears. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to press this really well. So if you are using faux leather or wax canvas, grab your seam roller. If you're using a cotton fabric, you can use an iron. We just want to press this, and then we want to fold it through to the back so that we can create the shape here. So I'm going to take mine over to the iron and give it a really good press. Just spend a bit of time doing this. This is where, if you use the same colour fabric for your facing, it's slightly easier, because just in case you end up with a little bit showing here, it won't be visible. So this is how it should be looking now. If you're using a fabric that doesn't like heat, use some double-sided tape to pin it down here. That will help it sit flat. So grab your zip pocket. Make sure that you've put your zip pull on. And you want it closing to the left. So I'm going to put it on with the fabric wrong side up. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the pocket over the top like this, and we're going to line it up with the top edge of the zip. So I'm going to use a little bit of double-sided fabric tape. Alternatively, you could use some fabric glue, but whatever you use, make sure that it is suitable for sewing. And I recommend using a Microtex needle or a super universal needle, as they both have anti-stick coatings. So you want your facing to line up with the side of the zip pocket. So the pocket piece is lying flat underneath. I'm going to top stitch all the way around this curve. I do recommend using nylon zip tape because it makes it so much easier to sew over like I am here. So you're going to flip that over and grab your longer pocket piece from earlier. And what we're going to do is we're going to line it up with the top of the zip. So it won't always match absolutely perfectly, but it's going to be pretty close. You want to make sure it matches on the sides here. And just go ahead and clip that on top. Okay, so we're just sewing 8 inches in the middle. We're not sewing an inch on either side. Or if you want to flip it over this way, we're just sewing on the zip bit, not the fabric bit. That's so that we can close up the side of the pockets in a minute. So I'm just going to baste that with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now you can clip the rest of the pocket together. We're going to sew the sides and the bottom. And to do that, you can just pull the main panel away like this and just go ahead and sew the whole thing. You can use 3/8 of an inch seam allowance or 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, whatever you prefer. And now you can just baste these top bits onto the main panel. So grab the panel that you want for the top on the same side of the exterior, and what we're going to do is we're going to place it just above. Now you'll notice that your bottom panel will have pulled in very slightly. This is not a problem. It should be about 1/8 of an inch maximum. That is absolutely fine because it will be hidden in the seam allowance. Just make sure your top panel is centered when you fold them right side together and clip them together. So we're just going to sew that top edge using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. When you reach the zip pull, just leave your needle in, lift your presser foot up and shimmy the zip pull underneath it. So you're just going to push that top panel up, and you can give that a good press with a seam roller or an iron. And then we're going to top stitch through here with all the seams behind it using 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now, if you have a handmade logo or a specific business logo, you could fit it on this panel. I would probably fit mine about 1 inch above this seam and centered. Okay, so you can see how that panel is tucking in a little bit. It's because of the zips pulling it in. It's just not a problem. We're going to have 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. It's going to be lost in the seam. So set that aside for a moment and grab your grab handles. So if you're adding piping, you're going to have your 2 14-inch grab handles and your 2 8-inch pieces of piping. Piping is optional, but it does give the handle a lot of structure, which is nice. So I'm going to mark 3 inches in using my erasable fabric pen. And this is going to give me a nice 8-inch in the middle to put my piping. So I'm going to use a bit of double-sided tape to hold it in place, just to make sure it stays centered. So place it between those marks. There we go. Now what we want to do is mark it on the opposite side. So we're going to mark where we're sewing up to. So this will be 2.5 inches. This is why you need an erasable fabric pen, because you don't want this showing later. So I'm going to fold my handle around the piping. You can feel now how much structure it's giving, especially with the size of the piping I'm using. You can use smaller piping, that would be just fine. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to sew from the 2.5 inch mark to the 2.5 inch mark, because we want to be able to have a flat section that goes into the top seam of the bag. So you need to backstitch really well on these marks where you begin and end. You may find it useful to use a zip foot so you can get closer to the piping if your standard foot isn't working well with the piping there. So once you're done, you're going to have this lovely rolled section here, and then at the ends of the handle you're going to have the flat bit that goes into the bag. So just go ahead and repeat that to create your second grab handle. That's both of your grab handles done. Now you can move on to the next step. Step 3 is the flap pockets. For this step you're going to need your elastic and buttons, or if you're using them, magnetic snaps. You'll need your two main stabilizers at the end. You're going to need your small pocket, so you'll have 2 exterior and 2 lining pieces. Your long pocket, 1 exterior and 1 lining. Your long pocket flap, 1 exterior and 1 lining. And your small pocket flap, 2 exteriors and 2 linings. And your lining flap pieces will have the stabilizer fused centered on the back already. You're also going to have your 2 exterior main panels. So we're going to start with the flaps. And for each flap piece, it's going to be the same construction method. So I will show you one, but you're doing the same thing for all of them. So you're going to place an exterior piece right sides together with a lining piece. And if you have a directional print, make sure that the curves of your flap are going to be at the bottom of the print. So you're going to place those right sides together and clip them together. So I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew from the top, and then I'm going to follow the stabilizer all the way around the curve and back up to the top. So you're just going to have a straight stitch at the top here. I recommend using a zip foot for this because the zip foot will allow you to follow the stabilizer's shape perfectly, and it will give a really neat finished flap. Okay, so again, I'm going to use pinking shears on the curves. You can cut little triangles instead. I'm also just going to trim these top corners just a little bit to try and reduce the bulk up there. Okay, so now we want to turn these right side out. And the stabilizer should push into each of the curves and create like a really nice shape quite easily. But I also like to use a turning tool or a chopstick or something just to kind of work those seams out. And I strongly recommend, if your fabric allows it, giving it a really good press with the iron, or give it a press with a seam roller. But you just want to get a really nice neat finish on this. The top edge is raw, that's correct, don't worry about that. Just go ahead and do the same thing with the remaining flaps. So your flaps are pressed. Don't worry if your exterior is coming down a little bit. This will be because it's showing a tiny bit on the lining side, but that is a better option than having the lining showing on the exterior side. So I'm not going to worry about that. Again, it will get lost in the seam allowance. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to top stitch each flap all the way around, but do not close this top section just yet. If you're using thicker fabrics, it can be hard to get started with the top stitch. In that case, try using a hump jumper behind your needle. So we're ready to fit these flap closures. So I'm going to use buttons in the video. In the pattern, there is instructions if you want to use a magnetic snap. You can reach inside and fit that now. But for the buttons, we are going 1 7/8 of an inch down and centered on these two. And on the big flap, we are going 1 7/8 of an inch down, and then you're 2 1/4 inches in. So I have a little bit of double-sided tape on the back of each button. I've marked my flaps. I'm going to go ahead and place the button on top. And then I'm just going to sew that in place. Now, you can sew through both layers if you want extra strength, going right through the lining as well, if you're not bothered about your stitching showing, or you can just do it through the inside. If you're just doing it through the inside, you might want to add an extra little bit of stabilizer behind it. Totally optional, up to you. But if you have a matching thread, you can just go ahead and sew it through your lining, and it will make it extra durable. So once your buttons or magnetic snaps are fitted, you're ready to move on to the pockets. So you should have your 2 long pocket pieces and 4 small pocket pieces. And on the back, I've marked all of them 3/4 of an inch from the top. So if you have a directional print, make sure you pay attention to that. So on this top edge, we're going to fold it down to the line and then give it a good press with the iron. Or you could use some double-sided tape if your fabric doesn't press well. So your lining pocket pieces likely won't have interfacing on. They don't need interfacing. I've just put it on there so you can see more clearly which is the wrong side of the fabric and which is the right. So all of my lines are folded down to. Now what you're going to do is grab an exterior piece and a lining piece, place them right sides together, and make sure that you match up that top edge nice and neatly, and then clip it together. So we're going to take these over to the sewing machine, and we're just going to sew the sides with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure you sew both sides in the same direction, so from top to bottom. That way, if there's any kind of stretch in the fabrics, the pocket won't end up wonky. So go ahead and turn those right side out, and you might want to press these side seams first, it's up to you. Can help get a neat finish on the exterior. So roll those seams between your fingers, get them to lie nice and flat. Make sure that top edge stays nice and neat. You might want to get some double-sided tape or fabric glue in there. But I'm going to press mine with the iron to make sure the sides are neat and the top is nicely lined up. I'm going to do that with all of my pockets, and then I'm going to top stitch this folded edge, and that's going to become the top edge. If your seams are bulky on the edge, make sure you use your hump jumper so you can get a neat start on the pocket. Now we're ready to fit the elastic. So your elastic, I do have a recommended length in the pattern, but something to bear in mind is that different elastic is different stretchiness. Your buttons might be a different size, so you may need to adjust this in a minute, but what we're going to do now is just fit it temporarily. So you're just going to use a basting stitch for this step. So we want it to overhang the edge by about 1 inch. That's going to be centered there, so I've got it centered, overhanging by 1 inch. And we're just going to run a couple of basting stitches through to hold it in place. And then we can adjust it if we need to. We've got that 1 inch overhang to play with if we need to make it longer or shorter. But the overhang is actually really good for making sure that the elastic stays strong in the seam. And on your long pocket, you should have measured 2 1/4 inches in and marked it so that you can place your elastic there. And then it should match up with your buttons above. Okay, I'll take that over to the machine and run a couple of basting stitches through. So if you're using magnetic snaps, just follow the instructions here for fitting your magnetic snaps instead. That's all in the pattern. So now we're going to grab one of our exterior main panels, and you want to mark the center on the bottom edge. Match that to the center of your long pocket. And again, you can just check it's equal on either side if you prefer. Okay, and we just want to sew the sides and the bottom. Up here we want to backstitch really well to make sure that it's strong. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start from the center, sew out and up, and then start from the center, sew out and up. And that's going to mean that if my fabric stretches at all, it's going to stretch equally on both sides. I'm not going to end up with my pocket shifting slightly. Okay, so you're ready now to fit your flap. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure and mark a line 2 inches down from this top edge. Okay, so we want to fit the flap like this, and then it's going to fold down. So I'm going to put a little bit of double-sided tape on the exterior of the flap. And you want this to be nice and close to the edge. So don't worry about your raw edge, it is going to be hidden. So you're going to place this on that line and make sure that it's lined up with the pocket edges. Okay, we're just going to sew that in place quickly with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now we want to fold this flap down, and this raw edge is going to be hidden in a minute by our sewing. So you should be able to feel your stabilizer in here. It should be just inside. There'll be a nice neat line, and that's where it will naturally fold. And I like to use a seam roller just to get this to sit flat. Make sure any double-sided tape isn't showing. Now what we're going to do is sew this on top, or top stitch it, with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance and then a 3/8 of an inch. And the 3/8 of an inch will seal in your raw edge and hide it. So now when you flip that up, you shouldn't be able to see your raw edge. And you just want to check that your elastic fits neatly around your buttons without it kind of pulling it. It does want to be a little bit tight, but you don't want it like curling up your panel like that. So just make sure that you're happy with how tight it is. You can always loosen the elastic down here a little bit. I think mine is just about right. A little bit tight, but not too tight. So we're now ready to fit the pockets onto the remaining exterior panel. To make sure that these line up perfectly with the panel below, what you want to do is just measure and just check what your distance is here. It's going to be about 1¼ inches from each edge, but you just want to make sure that your pockets up here have exactly the same distance. Then your buttons and everything will line up perfectly on your finished panel. So as we did with the long pocket, we're going to sew the sides and the bottom. I'm going to start from the center and work out and up on each side to make sure my pockets are equal. So I've marked my 2-inch line down from the top. This is exactly the same as we did for the long pocket. And I've got my double-sided tape. So I'm going to place that on the line, and I'm going to make sure that it lines up here on the edges. There's the same distance here as there is here, so that everything is in a nice straight line. So I'm going to take that over to the sewing machine and just sew an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance on both flaps. So you can notice I sewed one of my buttons just to the exterior, and then I sewed one through, so you can see the difference with the stitchings showing. But in real life, who lifts up the pockets all the way to have a look at the stitching? For me, I think that's a much easier way to do it, and I just think no one's ever going to see it. So the same as the exterior, I'm just going to find where the stabilizer crease is, and I'm going to fold my pocket down and give it a good press. Okay, and we're going to top stitch with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, then a 3/8 of an inch, and do the same thing on this flap. So once again, just check that the elastic is stretching okay around your pockets, so it's not pulling it up too much. This one's a tiny bit tight. I think that's going to be okay. But if it's any tighter than this, then I would definitely just adjust it, just pull it out of the seam a little bit more. You don't want it to be like rolling up your panel. So, but at the same time, you don't want it to be too loose. So you're going to have to make a determination based on your elastic and your buttons. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and place these two panels together. You could have them the other way around if you want, but I like the small pockets on top. So I'm going to fold it down like this, so they're right side together, and clip them together. Your elastic is going to be popping out the bottom. Don't worry about that. That's for added strength. We want that. So we're going to sew that now with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now you're going to push them away, and you want the seams to be behind this bottom panel here. So just give that a good press with the iron or with a seam roller, and then I'm going to top stitch through here with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I know I've still got a little bit of pull on my elastic. Don't worry about that, because when we attach it to the stabilizer, that should relieve the last of that. Okay, so grab your lining main panel pattern piece. I'm going to mark this on the back because it's much easier on white fabric. So what we're just going to do is mark the curves onto the bottom edge. Okay, so this is just to make sure that it ends up being the same shape as the lining. Double check that you are doing the bottom edge, not the top edge, because that would be pretty upsetting. And go ahead and trim those curves. Okay, now you're going to grab your stabilizer. So we're using a sew-in foam. Before we fit it, I'm just going to trim these little triangles at the top. They're about 1 inch by 1 inch. This is just going to reduce the bulk in the top seam when we come to finish the bag. So it's just going to make things a little bit easier. And then I'm going to go ahead and clip those together. Okay, make sure the whole thing's sitting flat to the stabilizer because your elastic may be pulling it in just a tiny bit. If you have any more pull than this, then it is too much, but mine's just got a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to baste that all the way around. Now repeat the process to attach the sew-in foam to the remaining lining panel. So you're going to cut the curves, you're going to trim your foam out of the top seams there, and then you're going to baste them together. So that's your 2 exterior panels done. Let's move on to the next step. Step 4 is the exterior gusset. For this step, you're going to need your exterior tab covers, 2 of those, your ring tabs, 2 of those, bag feet, 2 D-rings, and 2 exterior gusset pieces, which should already have the foam stabilizer basted to the back. And if you want to reduce bulk in the top seam, you can just cut that triangle of foam out if you like. That is optional, but it does make it easier to top stitch the bag at the end. So we're going to start with the ring tabs. And you want to draw a line down the center and then fold the long edges into that center line and press. So I'm going to press mine with an iron, but you could use double-sided tape to hold it in place if you're using a fabric like faux leather. Once those are both folded in, you're going to wrap them around a D-ring. Make sure that the raw edge is on the inside. Now, if you're using a fabric like quilting cotton like I am, I would just recommend slipping a little piece of stabilizer into this gap just to add some strength. I have some little scraps of Decaville left, so I'm just going to slip that in the middle. That's just 3/4 of an inch wide by 4 inches long. I'm just going to fuse that in place. So you need to wrap it around your D-ring. Make sure the raw edges are hidden on the inside. And then we're just going to sew here 1/4 of an inch down from the end of the D-ring. So set those aside for a moment and grab your exterior gussets. We're going to place them right side together. And we want to sew this bottom edge, so it's the longer of these 2 short edges. So I'm just going to clip those right side together, and then I'm going to sew that with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now we're going to press open that seam and top stitch each side. Okay, so there you have your gusset, your completed gusset. We've done it this way because then when you have a directional print, it will work. Otherwise I would have done the gusset in one piece, but it's nice to be able to work with directional prints too. So what you're going to do now is mark the placement for your D-ring tabs. So you're going to measure 2 1/4 inches down, and you're going to draw a 1 inch line that's centered. So once you've got your mark, I would recommend using a craft knife for this step. We're going to cut a slit here. So we're cutting this 1 inch slit, and if you have really thick fabrics, you might find that you need to make the slit bigger in a minute, but just wait and see how you get on first. What you're going to do is pop your D-ring through there. So if you're using faux leather or something like that, you might find that actually you can't get it to sit neatly and you need to cut it a little bit wider, but you don't want it too wide. Now you just want to have it sitting just above the slit, because in a minute we're going to put the ring tab over it and you want to be able to sew that quite easily and hide the slit, so just bear that in mind. And whatever you decide, I think I've got like 1/8 of an inch there gap between the bottom of the D-ring and the slit. Whatever you decide, just make sure it's equal on the other side. So we're doing this on both ends of the gusset. So what I'm going to do now is sew this with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. We're going to sew this multiple times. It's going to add strength each time. So just go ahead and don't worry about how much you're sewing it. It's going to be hidden under the cover, so it's absolutely fine. Okay, so both of your D-rings are now in and they've been sewn in place on the back. You now want to grab your ring tab covers and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to fold it in to the center line and press. Okay, so they're folded in just like we did with the D-rings. And now we're going to place them over the top, fix them in place with a bit of double-sided tape and top stitch the bottom and the top edges. Now, another alternative, if you have it, this is great use for things like ribbon. If you have, this is a like tulip pink ribbon by Renaissance Ribbons. It's quite cool. You can use that instead of a ring cover, and that does look pretty good. So you have lots of options here for what you want to do, but the ring covers are included in the pattern and are nice and simple. Okay, so I'm going with the ribbon for this one. I have put some double-sided tape on the back, and then I'm just going to make sure that it is covering the slit and any existing stitching. And then I'm going to sew the bottom edge and the top edge with 1/8 inch seam allowance. Remember as you're stitching this, you want to use kind of a smaller stitch length, like a construction stitch length, about 3mm, because you're sewing through the D-ring tab as well, and you're actually adding strength to this, which is important. Okay, so I'm just going to trim mine to match the gusset. Now, if you want to add a rivet through here for additional strength, you can go ahead and mark that now and even punch the hole. But I would recommend waiting and fitting the rivet right at the end when you can put it through the lining of the bag too. But rivets are optional. You do have a lot of sewing there. It should be strong enough without it. So go ahead and repeat with the other side. Okay, once those are both fitted, we can go ahead and fit the bag feet if you want to have them. These are optional. But I do love to have bag feet on my bag. So what I've done is I've drawn lines 4 inches out from the centre. So there's an 8-inch gap between these two lines. Then I've drawn little marks 1¼ inches in from the edge. So for each bag foot, I'm going to punch a little hole so I can fit it. Okay, so each of my feet screw in. So I'm just going to put a little bit of stabiliser behind each one. I like to just really reinforce them. So I pop my screw through and then attach my bag foot. So just go ahead and attach all of your bag feet. If you have prong bag feet or a different style, you might have to fit them slightly differently, but they will be similar and the location should work for either style. So that is your exterior gusset done. Let's move on to the next step. Step 5 is exterior construction. For this step, you're going to need your exterior gusset, 2 exterior main panels, and your grab handles. So first of all, we'll fit the grab handles. You need to mark your top edges on your main panels, and these are 2 3/4 inches in. Then what we're going to do is we're going to attach the grab handle on the inside of the mark, and you want a 1-inch overhang. So to make sure I've got a consistent overhang, I have drawn a 1-inch line on my webbing so that I can line that up nice and neat with my mark and clip it in place. Now this, it is going to be close in the seam. So when you sew your 3/8 of an inch seam later, it's going to be really close to this fold. Some people find that a little bit difficult. So if you want an easier time, just move this up so you've only got 3/4 of an inch overhang. Personally, I think it looks really good if there's barely any fold showing. But if you want an easier sew, then that's a nice easy alternative. So I'm going to put mine on that 1-inch mark. Handle is pointing down into the bag. The seam that we sewed is pointing up. I'm going to go ahead and baste that in place and repeat the same process with the other exterior main panel. So we're now ready to attach the gusset. So grab your front main panel. So I want my flat pockets to be on the front of the bag. So this one, the first side is always easier to sew. So sew whichever side you want to be on the front of the bag. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to match the centre of the gusset. It's going to be right sides together with the centre on the bottom here. So just add a few clips to hold that together. Now we're going to do the top edges. So you're going to match the top edge of the gusset to the top edge of your main panel and clip them together. And put a few clips down the side as well. Okay, so you're going to match the side over here as well. So match the gusset to the main panel. And go ahead and clip down the side. Okay, so we want to clip the curves last. And the reason for that is because, as you can see, it won't fit. That is correct. So the reason it doesn't fit is because the circumference of the seam allowance is less than the circumference of the main panel. So to make it fit nice and neat and not have too many puckers, we are going to snip into the gusset like this. So your snips should be about 1/2 inch apart, no more than 1/4 inch each. And as you can see now, it will fit nice and neat. So just clip that in place, and then you'll be able to sew the seam allowance without getting your panel all puckered. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and sew that with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. I find it much easier to sew with the gusset on top like it is now. I'm also going to sew a second line of stitching inside the seam allowance. It's going to be about 1/8 of an inch or less from my first line of stitching, but I'm starting and stopping about 1 inch from the top edge because I want to still be able to press my seams open at the end. This second line of stitching is going to strengthen the seam and ensure that the bag has as much support as possible. Okay, so there you go, you've got your one panel connected. So now we're going to do the same thing with this panel. So we're going to match the centre marks, the top edges, and then we're going to snip into those curves to make them fit. Once that's all clipped, take it over to the sewing machine and sew it with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Again, I find this easier to sew with a gusset on top. So the last thing we're going to do on here is we're going to baste open these top seams. So you can see now why I trimmed out the stabilizer. It's going to make it nice and flat where these seams are. Okay, so I like to press open these seams, and then I'm just going to baste them with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance at the top. That's going to keep this open, and then when I put the bag together later, it's going to keep all the layers nice and flat. The top stitch will be easier. So that is your exterior done. Let's move on to the next step. Step 6 is the lining zip pocket. For this step, you're going to need your zip and zip pull, zip pocket facing, zip pocket pieces, 2 of those, and one of your main lining panels. So again, I've made my facing match the fabric of the main panel because it's just easier to get a neater finish that way. So first of all, we are going to start with the zip pocket piece. So I've got my right side up, and I'm going to place the zip right side up on the top edge and clip those together. Your zip pocket is wider than it is tall. It's almost square but not quite, so just watch out for that. So now I'm going to sew this top edge with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. So have your second pocket piece right side up, and then you're going to take the other edge of the zip and place it right side up on the top edge. So you just want to make sure that your pocket pieces are lined up equally. My zip is a little bit longer than it should be, but that really isn't a problem. Okay, so your pocket pieces are now right sides together, and you're going to sew that edge with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now you want to take that over to the iron, and you want to press the zip pocket pieces away from the zip. Just watch out if you are using a metal zip. The nylon zip tape that we use doesn't melt, but just, you know, check on enough cut first. But I like to press it with the iron to get it to lay completely flat. That is going to really make it easier to fit to the panel. So if your zip pull isn't already on, you definitely want to put it on now, because it would be very frustrating to fit the pocket and then realise it doesn't have a zip pull. Okay, so now you want your zip pocket facing. I've drawn a rectangle on here. It's just 1 inch in from every edge, and that creates this 1/2 inch box. So what we're going to do is we're going to place it onto the lining main panel. They're going to be right sides together. You want this centered and 2 1/4 inches down from the top. So you want to have it pinned within the box, and then we're going to take this over to the sewing machine and sew the rectangle. When you get to the corners, change to a really short stitch length. I actually go down to a 1 for the corners. it will give it a neater finish when you're done. But of course that does depend on the material you're using, because I'm using cotton. If you are using a polyester material, you might need to keep your stitch length a little bit longer so that it doesn't perforate the fabric. So we now need to cut through this zip pocket facing. Okay, so we're gonna use a small pair of sharp scissors, or a craft knife I find is really good, because you need to get right into the corner here without cutting your stitching. So the closer you get, the neater it's going to be, but you do not want to cut your stitching. Okay, so now what we want to do is press all of the edges with the iron, and then we're going to push this facing through to the back and press it so that it's sat on the back of the main panel. Okay, so this is what we're looking at. Make sure you give it a really good press. It does make a difference to whether you end up with these big creases here or not. There's 3 things that help with that: the short stitch length, pressing it with the iron, and cutting as close as you can to your stitching. Okay, so you're going to grab your pocket, and the zip is going to be closing to the left. Now you want to use a little bit of fabric glue or double-sided tape on the edges here. That's going to help us hold this in place. So you want it right on the edge of the zip. Okay, and we're going to place this right over the top, and the edge of your facing should line up with the edge of the pocket on both sides, and then you know you've got it nice and centered. Make sure you've got a nice even gap on either side of the zip teeth here. Okay, so your zip pockets, one piece is coming up here and one piece is pointing downward. So you should make sure that they're both laying completely open like this, otherwise you'll sew your pocket closed and you can't use it. So we're going to take this over to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around this rectangle. I like to start on the long straight edges because it's very difficult to get your needle to match up perfectly on the corners if you start there. Okay, so that is sewn. So we're going to turn it over, and one of your pocket pieces is shorter than the other one. So you're going to fold up the shorter one by about 1/2 inch, not really too important, and give that a good press. Okay, now you're going to clip these together and just fold the longer one up to match and give that a press. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we want to sew the sides, just the sides of this pocket. We don't want to sew the bottom. So you're going to pull the main panel back and sew along there, and make sure you backstitch really well at the bottom. So that is your zip pocket done. You can just undo that so it's ready for later and set that aside. Let's move on to the next step. Step 7 is the stretch pockets. So this is optional. If you don't want the bottle pockets, that's absolutely fine, but I love this step. So you're going to have your stretch pocket, your fold over elastic, your center trim, and one of your main lining panels, the remaining one. So we're just going to start with the stretch bit. Now I also have a rivet for later. You don't have to, that again is optional. So what I'm going to do is attach this fold over elastic to the top edge, but as you can see the pocket is quite a bit wider, so I'm going to use a little bit of fabric glue and we're going to create some little pleats. So first things first, I'm going to match up the center. Now I am not worried about this being absolutely perfect. If you are, you can measure it all. I'm just going to clip the center together. Now I'm going to work on one side at a time. So I'll put a little bit of fabric glue on the inside of my fold over elastic. For me, the inside is the shiny bit, but I'm told it really doesn't matter. You can do it either way around. So I'm going to match up the end and clip that together. And then I'm just going to create 2 pleats, and they're going to be roughly 1/2 inch each. Just want to make sure they're about equal really. I am just doing this by eye. I'm just not worried about how accurate it is. It's not going to make any difference to how the pocket works. So as long as it looks pretty, I'm happy. Right, so there's my 2 pleats on that side. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So I'm making sure that my pleats kind of go in opposite directions to each other. But again, it's not going to make any difference to how your pocket works. Okay, there we have it. Now I strongly recommend using a matching thread for this. That will make a difference to how it looks. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew or top stitch the very top edge and the bottom edge as well, so that we're really encasing it and making sure that it stays strong to the mesh. So you now want to grab your main panel, and you need to mark it 8 inches up from the bottom. So I've got a little mark on each side. And I'm going to line up the elastic there, the fold over elastic, to that mark. Now your elastic should be the same width as the panel, but it stretches as you use it, so don't worry about it if it's slightly bigger like mine is. That's absolutely fine. What we're going to do is we're just going to match up the rest of the sides here and clip them together. And we're going to sew the sides from top to bottom so they're being sewn in the same direction. We're using 1/8 of an inch seam allowance here. Okay, so now that's done, what we want to do is you want to get the centre clipped first. So you want the centre clipped on the bottom. Again, I'm just looking at it and going with what looks right. Then we are going to match the pleats. So if you've got a pleat at the top, you want it to be about the same size on the bottom and in about the same place, like so. So just go ahead and clip those. Okay, and we're just going to sew that bottom edge with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So you just want to turn this over and just trim your mesh so that it matches the curve of your main panel. And you can trim off any excess where it's just kind of overhanging, because it does tend to move a little bit as you're sewing it. So the next thing we want to do is put the centre trim on, which is going to divide the pocket. So just as we did with the ring tabs and things like that, you're going to draw a line down the centre, fold the edges in to create a nice neat finish on one side so that we can fit it. But this is another opportunity where if you don't want to do that, you can instead use some ribbon again. So I do like my ribbon, and it is a great alternative if you don't want to do that, or if you have some ribbon and you're not sure what to use it for. So what we're going to do, whether you're using a centre trim or some ribbon, it's going to be taller than your pocket, about 1 inch taller. You're going to have some double-sided tape on the back or some fabric glue. And you're going to make sure it is nicely centered on the panel. So add another little bit of double-sided tape on this top 1 inch. And then that's going to allow you to fold it over and tuck it behind. There we go. So we're just going to sew up the edge here along the top and back down the long edge here. So you may want to just sew an extra X up here just to give it more reinforcement, because if you're going to have bottles going in here all the time, it's going to get a lot of wear. I'm instead going to fit a rivet, so I'm just going to make sure it's placed centered over everything. And I'm going to add a tiny bit of stabilizer behind. Just use whatever you have around. You may also want to use some fray check, depending what fabrics you're using. I'm going to use some because of this ribbon. Pop your rivet through, pop your stabilizer on the back. And I will set that with my hand press. So that's that step done. Let's move on. Step 8 is lining construction. For this step, you're going to need your 2 lining gusset pieces, your 2 lining main panels, your 2 mag snap trims, and your 2 magnetic snaps. So the mag snap trims, we are doing the same way as we've done quite a few of the pattern pieces. Drawn a line down the center, going to fold the long edges into the line, give it a good press with the iron. This is again another step where if you wanted to, you could use some ribbon if you preferred. but you need to make sure it is 1 inch wide ribbon. So once those are pressed, grab some double-sided tape and just stick that to the back on the raw open edge. And what we're going to do is we're going to place this 1 inch down from this top edge. So go ahead and get your ruler and check that that is 1 inch from the top. We're going to do the same thing with both panels. So take that over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew the top and bottom edges. I'm just going to use 1/8 of an inch seam allowance to hold that in place. You're now ready to fit your magnetic snaps. So you want to measure and mark 3.5 inches in from each edge. So I've already marked mine, and then you place the washer over the mark and mark your side slits. You can then cut these slits. There's various ways you can do this. I'm going to use the seam ripper for mine. Just be careful that you don't slip and cut a huge, yeah, you can cut a massive slit across the whole of your panel if you're not careful, so just be very, very careful. Now, if you're using cotton like me, you'll probably want to put a little bit of fray check on there. So we're going to fit both of the male snaps on the panel with the mesh pocket. So you're just going to push one of your male snaps through. And I really recommend putting a piece of stabilizer behind. This will protect the fabric from the prongs. Then you're going to put your washer over the top and fold those prongs down. These ones are quite stiff, so you can just use whatever you've got lying around to push your prongs down. Make sure they're nice and flat, and then you can also cover the back of the prongs if you want with a bit of stabilizer or a bit of interfacing, something to protect the fabric that's going to be on the back of this. So we're going to fit both male snaps to this side and both female snaps to this panel. So once you've got your magnetic snaps attached to both panels, you can set those aside. I've covered mine on the back with a little bit of stabilizer. You can just double check that they click together, that your magnetic snaps are in the right place, because I've made that mistake before. So grab your 2 lining gusset pieces and you're going to place them right side together and clip this bottom edge. We're going to sew this bottom edge with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then just press the seam open and top stitch both sides of the seam. Now that is done, we're just going to mark 3/4 of an inch down. This is on the wrong side of the fabric on the gusset. So I've done it on both ends. Now we want to construct our lining. So let's start with the mesh pocket. You want to have your centre marked on the bottom and you want to clip your gusset right sides together with that centre mark, and then you're going to clip the top edges. So we're doing this exactly the same way that we did the exterior. So as you did with the exterior, you clip the curves last, and you just need to snip into the curves here by about 1/4 of an inch or up to 3/8 of an inch, and then you'll be able to spread it so that it fits around the curve. So I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew with 3/8 of an inch to begin with, but when I reach this line here, I'm going to increase the seam allowance to 1/2 an inch gradually, and then we'll do 1/2 an inch all the way around and change back to 3/8 of an inch as we get to the line on the other side. Depending on your fabrics, you may even want to increase it to up to 5/8 of an inch. The reason we're doing this is to make the lining smaller so that it can fit within the foam structure of the exterior bag. So it does need to be slightly smaller than the exterior, and it depends just how structured your foam is and how thick your exterior fabric is. That will determine exactly the right seam allowance that you want to use here. But I'm going to be using 1/2 an inch. The reason we're doing 3/8 of an inch at the top is so that this still fits perfectly and the seams will match up with the exterior seams when we're doing that. So what I'm going to do is just trim the curves with some pinking shears so that my curves sit a little bit neater inside the bag. So don't get too close to your stitching. Now grab your remaining lining panel. So this is the one with the zip pocket on it. What we're going to do is we're going to mark a 10-inch turning gap in the bottom before we attach it. Okay, so I have marked my 10-inch turning gap on the back. And what I'm going to do first of all is match up the centre to the centre on the gusset and clip those together. And then again I'm going to match up the top sections next. And then you're going to clip everything together, clipping the corners last. So if you want to sew with the lining gusset on top this way, then you can just transfer those marks for the turning gap, because you just want to make sure that you don't sew where the turning gap is. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew from the top down and then back stitch well where the turning gap is, and do the same thing on this side. So we can turn the whole bag out through here, and then later we'll sew this up through the zip pocket. So don't worry, it won't be showing in your lining later. Okay, so we have our lovely turning gap for later. So the last thing to do here is to press these top seams open. If you ever have a little bit like this where they don't quite match, just kind of trim them to match. It really isn't a problem. It's just where the fabric has stretched a little bit on one side as you've sewn it. So I'm going to press these seams open, and then I'm just going to baste them open and do the same on the other side. So step 9 is final assembly. So you're going to need your lining and your exterior, and you're going to need the bits for your strap, which is 2 swivel hooks, a strap slider, and some rivets if you're using them. So the first thing that we're going to do, we are going to turn the lining so that it's right side out. And then we're going to put it inside the exterior. So you can put this any way around you want, really. I'm going to put it so that my interior zip pocket is against my flaps. But it's totally up to you. But basically the lining is going right sides together with the exterior, and the handles need to be going down into the bag between the layers. So the first thing you're going to do is match up these side seams. And you just want to make sure that they match perfectly on the lining and the exterior, and then clip those together. And if for some reason they're not matching up, it just means you've used the wrong seam allowance on either your exterior or your lining, and you just have to go back and adjust it. So now we're going to clip the rest together. If you've got centre marks, you can match those up, make sure they're nice and neat, and then just clip it all the way around. Now we are leaving the handles long like this. I know it looks a bit messy, but having the extra length inside the seam is really important for adding strength to the handles. It means they will last a lot longer. If you've ever made a bag where you've trimmed it down to the seam, if you've used the bag, you will know that eventually they will fray and come out of the seam, which is frustrating. Okay, so I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew 3/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around the top. I actually find this easier to do on my machine like this, so I'm sewing the inside, but everybody's different. If you have a thread colour that matches well to both your exterior and lining, go ahead and use that, so that if there is any stitches kind of showing, they won't be visible. I'm actually going to baste it with 1/8 of an inch first, because I find that way easier. Then all my clips are out of the way, then I can do my accurate 3/8 of an inch seam. But this is just optional. You can go straight in and do the 3/8 of an inch seam allowance if you like. Okay, so you now need to turn your bag out to do the final top stitch. So you're going to find the gap in your lining and grab your exterior and try and pull that through first. Or push rather, because pulling can be more likely to damage it. Now watch out for your elastic on your pockets and your grab handles, because they can kind of get caught around the bag. Okay, so it shouldn't be too difficult. It's a pretty big gap. And then you want to reach in with your arm and push all of the seams out in the exterior. So you just want to like really push your curves out. You can sort out any stray threads like that later. So push the seams out, get a nice neat finish, make sure it's sitting neat, so that then when you push your lining in, you can make sure that it's sitting all the way down and that it's going right down into the bottom of the bag. Now, you can get rid of these little loose threads now if you like. Okay, so what you want to do is roll this seam, this top seam. We want, like you can see, it's kind of messy right now. That's not what you want. Before you top stitch it, you want to kind of push it out. So you just reach inside the bag and give it a good push, give it a roll, and you can clip it, or you could press it with an iron if you prefer. But what you want is that when you're looking at the exterior, you can't see the lining. And also you want it to be as flat as possible, because if it's all like bulky on top, then it's going to make it harder to stitch. Now these little seams here on the top, they can get a little bit bulky, especially if you didn't trim out your foam. So you might just want to like hit it with a mallet, get it to go nice and flat. So before you actually start your top stitch, I would recommend just making sure that the lining is sitting all the way down in the bottom of the bag, so it's not trying to like push up and cause you problems while you're top stitching. Now I am going to use a matching thread for my exterior, and I'm going to change my bobbin thread to one that fits for my lining fabric, because it'll just make the top stitch look that bit neater. I tend to use a longer stitch length for top stitching, about a 5mm. I also make sure that I increase the tension on my machine because there's a lot of layers. And when you get to the bulky areas, I would definitely recommend using a hump jumper, as that will prevent any skipped stitches. Make sure when you're adjusting the bag that you leave the needle in before you start moving it around. Okay, so that's it top stitch. So you can see when you have a matching thread, it really makes it look nice. Sorry, the underneath of my machine is a little bit dusty, so my bag will need a good dust when I'm finished. So the next thing we're going to do, you're going to reach in through the pocket, and what you want to do is grab that lining that you left open. Okay, so you're going to pull the lining out through the zip pocket. Right, and go ahead and clip the gusset and the lining panel together. And we just need to sew that between the turning gap marks so that we're sewing up the rest of the lining. Remember to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance here, as we were using a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the lining. Okay, so if you want to, you could just use some pinking shears on these curves now, because we didn't earlier because we had that gap to deal with. And now you can shove your lining back in. And you just want to make sure it's sitting really neat. I like a nice snug lining, so if you're in any doubt now that if your lining is feeling a bit too baggy, you could go in and you could increase the seam allowance in the lining a little bit now. But you'll usually find if you give it a good press now, it will sit nice and neat. So another extra step that you can take if you want to, you could put some fabric glue in through the pocket now and glue the lining gusset to the exterior. And it gives it a really neat finish and makes sure that it stays perfectly in place. But that's completely optional. Another thing you could do if you like a super stiff base is you can add like an extra base lining now. I know some people just, even if it's full of tons of books, they want it to keep like a perfectly flat base. So if that's you, then yeah, you could cut it at about 11 inches by 5 inches and slip it through the pocket and between the layers now. That would be a good time to do this. But for me, what I'm going to do is just sew up this pocket and finish it. So we're just going to clip that pocket together and sew it with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so go ahead and shove your pocket back inside the bag. Close it up. Okay, and your bag is probably going to need a good press with the iron if you're using fabrics that can handle the heat. So now we just have to make the strap. So this is a very simple crossbody strap. We have other strap ideas on our YouTube channel that you can check out, but for this one we're just doing a simple webbing strap. So I got my slider, I'm going up and over the center bar, and then I'm going to fold the raw edge underneath so it will be hidden like that. Now you can sew this on your sewing machine with an X and a box, or you could just do a line of stitching as close as you can get and a line of stitching on the end. Totally up to you. I'm going to set some rivets instead. So for this I just punch a hole, and you want to be quite close to the slider, but also you want to be able to set it so not too close. And then once you've got your hole, you can just pop the rivet in, put the cap on, and I'll do one on the other side too. So now I'll just take those over to the hand press and set them. So you're going to take the other end of the strap and put a swivel hook through it. Then bring it back and make sure there's no kinks or anything, and it just goes back up and over that center bar. And as you pull it tight, you can see the swivel hook should be sitting like that. So you're going to grab the other end, put it through the remaining swivel hook, and again we're going to fold the raw edge underneath. You can have a fold anything up to like an inch here, it's absolutely fine, depends how you want it to look. And then go ahead and set your rivets or sew it in place. So I'll set those on my hand press, and that is the strap all done. Well, that turned out pretty cute. So I am really chuffed with that. It's so different to the other ones that I made. So this is how it's going to look if you make it out of something like canvas. The foam gives it tons of structure. It still works brilliantly as an everyday bag. I really hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial. I will have another one up soon. I'm already working on my next couple of patterns, so make sure that you follow us, and hopefully you'll get notified when the next video comes out. See you soon. Bye.